Hello everybody, my name is Sid Dalal, and today I will be talking about forced induction and internal combustion engines. There are a couple of reasons as to why I chose this particular topic. Ever since I was given my first Hot Wheel, I have been a huge fan of everything to do with automobiles. This love has grown throughout my childhood and has carried on with me into college. Because of this deep-rooted fascination, I am currently a part of the Woo Racing team, which is an organization that designs and builds a car from scratch every year to compete in the worldwide Formula SAE competition. This topic seemed relevant because naturally aspirated engines are giving way to their forced induction counterparts in both consumer and racing vehicles. Instead of lamenting the death of the monstrous V8s, V10s, and V12s of the past, I've decided to embrace the future and learn more about forced induction. Now, before we get into the detailed specifics of forced induction, we must first understand the basic principles of an internal combustion engine. Almost all conventional engines used in automobiles utilize a four-stroke mechanism to convert chemical energy into mechanical energy. This means that in a given chamber which contains a piston, an intake valve, an exhaust valve, and a spark plug, four distinct phases occur. There is an intake phase, a compression phase, a combustion phase, and an exhaust phase. The following series of images depict the four stages in the order they occur. You first have the intake phase, then the compression phase, then the combustion phase, and then the exhaust phase. One may ask how these various stages result in rotational movement. There are two major components responsible for timing all of these processes. They are called the crankshaft and the camshaft. The pistons, which experience the up and down motion due to combustion, are connected to the crankshaft. The positions and angles at which the pistons are connected to the crankshaft are important, as the crankshaft controls the vertical movement of the piston at any given time. The camshaft is connected to the crankshaft via a timing belt. The role of the camshaft is to coordinate the opening and closing of the intake and exhaust valves with the positions of the pistons, so that the air-fuel mixture and exhaust gases can enter and exit all the cylinders present in an engine at the proper times. If the timing between the camshaft and the crankshaft is off, the engine will not operate smoothly, and it may even experience a failure of some sort. Here is an animation of how this process works. So you may be wondering, what does forced induction have to do with any of this? Well, the combustion phase is fueled by the air-gasoline mixture. Engines that do not have forced induction are limited to a certain compression ratio, which means they cannot have a very high density of air-gasoline mixture in their cylinders. This is because more air cannot be forced into a cylinder after a certain point through the use of traditional air intakes. In a sense, forced induction compresses air so that more of it can be mixed with the gasoline in the cylinder. The greater the density of the air-gasoline mixture in the cylinder, the more powerful and efficient the resulting combustion is. Now there are two major types of devices responsible for implementing forced induction. There are turbochargers and superchargers. We will be looking at both in detail in the following slides. The best way to look at how a turbocharger works is to break it down into its two primary components. There is a half that connects to the engine's exhaust, and another half that connects to its air intake. Essentially, the rotational energy derived from the engine's exhaust gases spinning the turbine in the exhaust half of the turbocharger provides the energy required by the compressor in the other half of the turbocharger to compress air. The two are connected to each other via a shaft, which extends from the exhaust turbine to the compressor. In the grand scheme of things, the turbocharger is connected to the exhaust of an engine, which powers the turbocharger's turbine, which in turn powers the compressor of the turbocharger. The compressed air then moves through an intercooler which cools the air, thus compressing it even further. The air then enters the air intake of an engine, and the cycle repeats itself. This diagram illustrates this nicely. And now, we move on to the inner workings of a supercharger. There are a few different types of superchargers, but the screw-type supercharger pictured on the slide is by far the most common and popular for street use. As the diagram shows, typically there are two screws housed inside the supercharger. One of these screws is connected to a shaft that protrudes outside the main body of the supercharger. This shaft is important as it is connected to the crankshaft via a belt. The crankshaft turns the belt, which turns the screws inside the housing of the supercharger. As these screws rotate, they compress air and force it directly into the engine's air intake, without the use of an intercooler. Now that we have taken a look at both superchargers and turbochargers, it is quite apparent that there are some clear differences between the two. Superchargers are designed in a way that they harness some of the engine's power in order to achieve forced induction. This isn't a problem for larger, more powerful engines. However, for smaller engines, the power sapped by the supercharger might be too much to result in a net increase in power. Turbochargers do not utilize any of the engine's power, as they simply rely on exhaust gases to achieve forced induction. Another difference between the two is response times. Since the supercharger is directly connected to the crankshaft, its response to different throttle inputs is instantaneous. The turbocharger, however, suffers from an effect called turbo lag. This lag in response to different throttle inputs is due to the fact that it takes some time for the exhaust to rotate the turbine present inside the turbocharger. This means that the power increase from forced induction happens a few moments after the engine throttles up in turbocharged cars. Comparatively, supercharger systems are easier to install as they do not require the complex tubing and connections for intercoolers associated with turbocharged systems. Superchargers simply bolt onto the air intake of an engine and only require a belt connecting to the crankshaft. While this is all interesting, it's easy to ask the question, why use forced induction at all? Well, turbocharged and supercharged engines can reduce emissions, and they are also more thermodynamically efficient than their naturally aspirated counterparts. Forced induction engines can also be lighter and more compact, and they can also be cheaper to make. More importantly, forced induction engines are more powerful than their naturally aspirated counterparts, which means you can have smaller engines producing more power than their naturally aspirated counterparts. If I were to research this topic further, some of the questions that would come to my mind are, how has forced induction changed from when it was conceived to now? Has the recent drop in gas prices decreased the sales numbers of forced induction vehicles? And are hybrids a suitable replacement for forced induction engines? Or are these two technologies compatible? Thank you for watching, and I hope that you found this video both informative and helpful.